Flask is a Python web framework where you can start running with a single file and 5 lines of code. Need an API? In Flask, you can deliver a JSON API in 1 line of code. Flask has a number of powerful features to help you develop websites quickly. It has a templating system, message flashing, URL routing, support for serving static files, and much more. In learning for my introductory course on Flask, where we'll start from scratch to create a URL shortener and file storage website. At the end, I'll even walk you through the basics of testing your project and deploying it so that your website can be enjoyed by everyone. Come join me and see for yourself how Flask can simplify your own web development. Let's go ahead and talk about the pros and cons of Flask. Now, let's start with the pros here. Flask is amazing for getting a project up and running quickly. There's so little in your way. There's almost nothing to configure. If you need to build something quickly, Flask is a great framework for that. Also, Flask is very customizable. Flask is often described as bare bones, meaning that there's so much customization that you can do with Flask to make things exactly how you want it and how you want to interact with your data. And lastly, Flask is WSGI compatible, meaning that you can use any sort of web server that is WSGI compliant to run your app. So if you're going to be using Gunicorn or a whole variety of servers, there's anything that you want out there. Now let's go ahead and cover the cons. What was a pro that Flask is bare bones can also be a massive con. You have to build almost everything that you want to do in Flask. If there's lots of different options that other developers have used before, you still have to create that yourself. Now there's lots of different packages and dependencies that you can bring in your project to try to utilize code from other developers, but often there's not a set standard to say this is the Flask way. It's so loose that you often end up having to create your own setup there. And to go along with this, if you're working with any sort of database, there's absolutely no help from Flask. You have to write all your custom SQL statements. You have to create objects, turn them back into database data. It's a whole lot of work. So to kind of summarize, if you want to decide whether you're going to use Flask or not, you got to think, how much do I value customizing my project exactly how I like it? Now, before we get started, let's talk about what you should know going into this course. So the first and probably most important thing is you should have a good grasp on Python and specifically Python 3. Now I'm going to be using Python 3.8. It doesn't really matter what version you're using as long as you've got Python 3, but this is going to be the basis upon which everything is built. Now on top of this, you should have a good understanding of pip. Now pip is what we use to install Python packages. We're not going to be using it a ton, but it will be nice if you have a background in that. And finally, you should know some basic HTML. If you've done any sort of web development, we're not going to be getting very advanced at all, but you should at least know what an H1 tag is, a paragraph tag. If you're comfortable with those, you'll do great in this course. Before we go ahead and get started, I want to give you an idea of what it is we're going to be building in this course, and that is a URL shortener. I didn't want to teach you just a bunch of separate features in Flask. I wanted to bring it all together in one cohesive project where you could see why Flask is such a great tool. Now, what this website can do is we can take some sort of website like Google and say, I want to create a short code for this so that whenever I just type go, I can instantly get to Google. So if I go ahead and create this, it's going to make a unique URL for me. And in this case, you can see it's our website /gogo. And whenever I visit this page, it takes me to Google. We also have the ability in this site to upload files. Let's say I have a house that I'd like to share with my friends that I'm thinking about buying. I can go ahead and call this my house, shorten this. And now I have this URL that when I provide to someone, they can simply go to the name of our website /myhouse, and they can see very quickly that file. In addition to this, we'll be learning how to work with cookies so that users can see all the different codes that they've created before. And we'll even learn how to make an API with one line of code so they can quickly get that information. As you can see, we're going to stylize this with Bootstrap so it's an amazing looking product for the end user. And if someone tries to create something with a name that's already existed before, like GoGo, which we already took, there'll be a warning displayed using Flask's flashing system. While this is the finished product, I'm going to take you from absolute square one to learning step by step how you can create a functional Flask application. In this course, I'm going to be creating our website with a Mac computer. Now, all the commands that I use are going to work for any Mac users and Linux users as well. However, if you're using a Windows machine, there's a few differences I'd like you to keep in mind. And most of the differences come down to I'm going to be using a terminal and you will be using command prompt. So in the terminal, whenever I do ls to see what's inside of a directory, you're going to want to do dir. When I do pwd to see where we're currently at on our computer so that we can copy that path and bring it into our project, you're going to want to do an echo with a cd surrounded by 2 percentage signs. And finally, in Flask, when we specify what the app is going to be or the environment, in my terminal, I'll do export Flask app is equal to, for example, hello, where you'll do set Flask app is equal to hello. So the Flask app and what you're setting it equal to, the environment, that's all the same, but instead of export, you're going to want to use set. Now, the last piece of info that I want to share with you is that when you're bringing in that path into your project for where we're going to save some images and different files, you're going to want to make sure that you are using the / instead of the \. The issue with the / that you typically get with the Windows path is that it will cut the string short and make all sorts of issues. So if you use that / Python is smart enough to convert that to your Windows system to still get to the correct place. Just make sure you use those /. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our first Flask project. Now, before we get creating our Flask project, we've got to build a nice environment in which our project can live. So first, let's go ahead and open up our terminal. Once we have that terminal open, we want to move to a place where we can work with our data. I'm going to do this on my desktop, so I'm going to do a cd capital desktop, and I'm going to move to my desktop here, and then I'm going to create a virtual environment. Now, included with Python is the virtual environment package where you can create that. I really like the pipenv package that allows you to both have a virtual environment and very easily manage the different packages that you're going to have for your project. So in order to make this, let's go ahead and first create a project directory where we can store all of our data. Now we are going to be creating that URL shortener. So let's go ahead and make a directory with make dir space, and then give a name for our project. I think we should use something like URL-shortener. Now make sure that you don't have any spaces in the name of this folder, and go ahead and hit enter there, and then we'll cd into that directory. cd URL shortener. Now that we're there, we're going to be using pipenv in order to set up our environment. So let's go ahead and make sure that we have pipenv installed on our computer. We're going to do pip3 install pipenv. Now, once that's finished, we're going to go ahead and do a pipenv install, and this is going to go ahead and get our directory up and running to be a pipenv environment. So you'll see essentially what this entails. If I go ahead and do an ls here, it creates a pip file and a pipfile.lock that essentially holds all the different packages that we're going to be working with here. Now, what's great about pipenv is that if we want to use our virtual environment and all the different packages that we have there, we can say pipenv shell, and then we are instantly launched into this virtual environment right inside of that directory. And if we ever want to get out of this, we can simply just type exit, and we're back to the regular version of our terminal here. But we are going to be using pipenv here, so let's do our pipenv shell to get back in there. And now it's time to install Flask. So let's go ahead and type out pipenv install Flask. And I want to make a special mention here that since we're using pipenv, we don't install things via just pip anymore. It's pipenv install and then whatever package that you'd like. So let's go ahead and hit enter on that. That's going to get Flask installed here. And once that's finished, to confirm that this is working, let's go ahead and type out Flask and just hit enter. And you should see a little pop-up like this. This tells you some of the basics of Flask. This will confirm that it's on your computer and ready to rock and roll. Now that we've created a directory for our project, it's time to start writing some code. So you need some sort of text editor to be able to edit and create new code. I'm going to be using Atom, which you can get for free at atom.io, but feel free to use any code editor that you would like. So let's go ahead and open up Atom. And once that opens up, we're going to go ahead and open up our directory. So I'm going to move to my desktop, open up URL shortener, and we should see the two files that pipenv has created for us, the pip file and the pipfile.lock. These simply just say what different packages we have installed. As you can see, the only thing that we have right now is Flask. So let's go ahead and create a new file, and we are going to save this just simply as hello.py. Now this is where we're going to be writing our very first Flask code, and in order to write Flask code, we need to import Flask into our project. So up at the top here, we're going to say from lowercase Flask import capital Flask, and make sure that second one's capital. And once you've done that, we need to create our own app. Now, the terminology here is that whenever you have a Flask project, ultimately at the end of the day, there's going to be an app or an application which serves your website. So just know that's when someone talks about a Flask app, this is what they're talking about, is at some point you've got to have a file that creates a Flask app. And the way that we do that is we simply just say all lowercase app is equal to capital Flask, which we just imported. And then we have to pass in as an initializer a variable called __name__. Now, this is simply just the name of the module that is currently running in Flask. And if this is confusing at all, let's go ahead and just below this line of code, print out whatever this variable is going to be. So we'll go ahead and just copy and paste that in that print statement. And let's go ahead and move back to our terminal and make sure that in your terminal that you're inside of the project and you've done your pipenv shell to make sure that you have access to your different packages there. Now that we're there, let's go ahead and say export in all caps Flask_app equal to, and we need to give it the name of our file. So this is simply just telling Flask, hey, when you run, I want you to look for this name of file when you run the web server. So we'll go ahead and hit enter on that. And now that we've done that, we can say Flask run. And when we hit enter, you can see this starts our Flask app up at the top there. It says that the name of it is hello by default. This is a production environment. And you'll notice down below, it printed out hello, which was that __name__. Okay. So now that we see that that's working, let's go ahead and move back to our code. And once we're there, we can get rid of this print statement. This was just to help you understand more of what that variable was and how it creates that Flask app. Now, with our Flask app, it's not much unless it can actually serve some information via a website. So we have to create something called a route. Now, in the next video, we're going to go into more detail about what a route is, but a route simply just says when someone visits this web page, we should return back the following text. So here we're going to type at lowercase app .route, and then we're going to specify which URL we want to create a route for. And in this case, we want one for the home page. So if we just do a single slash, this means that someone has visited the base URL and we want to provide some information. Next, we have to give a name and a function for this route. So we're going to say def home to signify our home page here. And this is just a regular Python function here. And ultimately, we just have to return back some sort of object to be displayed to the user. In this case, let's simply just return a string. Flask does all the work of turning this string into a proper HTTP response to be visible on a web page. So we're going to just make a string here and say hello Flask with an exclamation point. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. Now that we've added some new code, we need to make sure that we go back to our terminal, stop the server that's currently running. If we do a Control-C, we can stop that, and then just simply type Flask run again. That'll get things up and running with our new changes here. And now that we've done that, let's go ahead and check and see what our website looks like. So you can see here in the terminal, Flask has told us where we can access our website. It's this HTTP 127. And all that great information. So we'll go ahead and copy that URL. And let's go ahead and take our web browser and now enter in this URL. And once we've done that, you can see there's the hello Flask that we wanted to be returned. So what have we done here? We have created a new Flask project, and inside of it created a Flask app in which we created one single route to say, if you go to the home page, return back the following text. Now, if we mess with the URL at all, if we say /hello or something like that, it's not going to find it. If we do a /about, that's not going to work either. But if the user just simply goes to the home page, we do know what information to display there. And one last pro tip is that if you've ever seen this 127 number, it just simply means refer to the local machine, your computer that you're using to find this web content. This can also be replaced by localhost. Up to you about how you want to specify either that number or localhost, but just thought you should be aware of those two being the same thing. Up till this point in time, we've been running our Flask app in a production environment. The big limitation of this is that anytime we make a change to our code, we have to manually go into our terminal, hit Control-C, stop the server, and then run it again. Now, if we were to run our Flask app in a development environment, it would automatically notice any time changes are made to the code and restart our server for us. So let's go ahead and learn how to do that. So we're going to do our Control-C to stop the server from running. Then we're going to do an export, just like we did with the Flask name, except this time we're going to say all caps Flask_env, which is short for environment. And then we'll just type out lowercase development. We'll go ahead and hit enter. And now that we've set that, we'll go ahead and run Flask run one more time. And now you can see we are inside of the development environment. So to test this out, whether it will actually auto update and reset itself once we write some new code, let's go ahead and move back into our code editor. And now that we're here, let's learn how to create more than one route to really solidify the idea of what routes are and how they work. So let's go ahead and make a new route here that we will call @app route. And let's go ahead and create an about page for our website where users can understand what this website is for. So we'll go ahead and do our parentheses here. Inside of the parentheses of the route, this is where you specify the URL. So if we go ahead and do a /about here, if someone goes to our website, like the localhost :5000 /about, it would run the following function that we're going to create. So let's go ahead and make a new function here. And we'll call this one about with our colon. And please note that the name of the function and the name of the route do not have to match. Now in the about section, you can see on line 9 the /about, and on line 10 the name of the function about. Those do match. But for the route for the home page at 5, it's simply just the / and then we gave it a different name of home. Know that those two things do not have to match. And here inside of our about function, let's just simply go ahead and return a little information. We'll say this is a URL shortener. So let's go ahead and just save this file. And you'll notice just by saving this, if we go back to our terminal, the server was smart enough to detect a change. You can see it says detected change in, and then it lists our file, and it reloaded the server for us. So now that this has taken place, we can move to our browser, and let's go to /about, and we'll notice now that it has that text that we created earlier that says, hey, this is a website that is a URL shortener. Now, one more pro tip about running the Flask application in the server. Let's go ahead and move back to the terminal. Every time that you start a new terminal session and you want to test out your website, you have to specify what the Flask environment is going to be and also what the Flask app is going to be. However, if you'd like to save a step, we can go back to our code editor and rename our hello.py to app.py. Flask is smart enough to know inside of the directory, if there's a file named app.py, that is the default app that it should be running. So we'll go ahead and right click this file and rename this to app.py. And once that's changed, let's go ahead and go back to our terminal, and I'm going to close out completely. I'm going to start up a new terminal session, move to where our project is here on our desktop. I'm going to use pipenv shell to get into our virtual environment here. And then I'm simply just going to say Flask run, and I have not specified the app yet, but Flask is smart enough to know, hey, I found the app.py file and I ran it. If we go check out our browser and reload our page, we can see that it's still working. Now, we are not able to specify that it should automatically be a development environment, so we're going to have to do a Control-C and say export all caps Flask _env and set this equal to development. But that does save us one step of always having to specify what the Flask app name is going to be. So with that, let's go ahead and do Flask run. And one more time, make sure that our site is working by reloading, and it looks great. Now currently, our website is only returning back these strings that we have here in our file. And eventually, we want to do a whole lot more than this. We want to have HTML code, maybe possibly put in some CSS and JavaScript, and to cram that all into one string is really going to be a hassle. So we're going to use templates so that we can have all that data stored in a separate HTML file that we can simply just load via one line here. Now, in order to utilize this, we have to create a new project in our directory. So we're going to right-click and do a new folder and name this templates with an S. This is a special name that the Flask application is going to be looking for to say, hey, is there anything inside of templates? And inside of templates, let's go ahead and create a new file. We're going to create a file that represents our home page. So we're going to name it home.html. Now, once you've created this home.html, let's go ahead and put some example text that will say if this loads, we'll recognize that the template is working. So we're going to use an h1 tag here to simply let ourselves know that we are at the home page. So we're going to say this is home inside of an h1 tag. We'll go ahead and save this file. We'll then move back to our app.py, and now rather than just returning hello Flask, we want to return back that home.html. Now, in order for this to happen, up here at the top, when we import some information from our Flask package, we'll also add a comma here to also import all lowercase render _ template. Now that we've imported that, with our route, rather than just simply returning a string, we can return render _ template. And what we need to pass into this function is the name of the template that we're trying to show. So in this case, that's going to be home.html. So let's go ahead and save this. And because we are running in a development environment, our server is going to be automatically updated for us. And if we go ahead and visit our home page, we should see in big bold letters, because it's in the h1 tag, this is home. So this shows us that the code that we've written inside of home.html is displaying when someone comes to the route of just simply a slash, meaning the home page. This templating functionality all comes thanks to Jinja. Now, Jinja is this awesome template engine which is created by the same people that have created Flask. However, Jinja is used in a lot of other projects than just Flask. It's pretty popular, and there's so many different options and functionality that you can use with Jinja. I really recommend researching it for more information. But with that, let's go ahead and look at one specific technique that we can use with these Jinja templates. So in our code, we have the ability to pass some information from our app.py file into the template file. So in this case with our home page, let's go ahead and pass forward a variable that just contains our name. So we're going to add a comma here and just type out the name of any variable you want. This doesn't have to be name, but I'm going to call it name here. And I'm going to simply specify this to my own name, which is Nick. And I'll save this. And now, if I go over to my home.html, I'm going to make a separate h2 tag. And inside of this h2 tag, I want to provide my name. Now the question is, how do we take this variable name that we specified here and access it inside of our template? Well, in Jinja, you just simply do 2 curly brackets, Then type out the name of your variable, which in this case is name, and then 2 ending curly brackets. So we'll go ahead and hit save on this, come back to our home page, reload, and we should see the name Nick coming through. Now, of course, if you did your own name, you'll see your name there. But this shows you the power of templates and how inside of this template file, we could provide a lot more information and it can be its own separate environment. So we're not cramming all that information inside of our return statement here. In the last video, we learned how to pass forward variables into our templates. We don't need that functionality, so we'll go ahead and delete that here from our app.py on line 7. And then inside of our home.html, we'll get rid of this h2 tag where we use that variable. Also, while we're here, this in home isn't the greatest way to describe our project. We're creating a URL shortener. So let's go ahead and change this to URL shortener so that when our users visit our website, they'll be able to clearly understand what it is that we're creating. So with this, let's go ahead and reload our home page. We should see that nice big URL shortener and talk about what it is that we've got to do next. And that's that the whole purpose of our project is that someone's going to pass in a big long URL and then a short name that they want to have for that URL so that they can quickly access it without having to remember that entire thing. So in order to create that, here inside of our home.html, we're going to be creating a form where they can input this information. So we'll create an opening form tag as well as an ending form tag. And with the opening tag, we're going to specify an action, which basically says where it is that we want this form to go to. What URL do we want the user to go to after they hit enter? So we're going to go ahead and go to a URL called your-URL. And then here inside of this form, we've got to have 3 different inputs. The first is what is the full length URL that they are looking for. The next is what code do they want to be associated with that. And then finally a button where they can submit the form. So we're going to start first with an input tag. And this input tag is going to be of type URL. And we'll go ahead and set the name for this to also be URL. And its value just equal to an empty string. Next, we're going to have an input that we want to have for the short name that they want to provide. So we're going to say that this is of type text. We'll give this the name of code, meaning that this is like the short code that they're looking for. And again, we'll say that its value is equal to an empty string. Now, finally, there should be a way to submit this form. So we're going to make one more input and we're going to set the type on this to be equal to submit. Great. The value in this case, because it's a submit, this is the value that's the text that's going to show up inside of the button. So I'm going to have this one say shorten. Great. Now with this in place, let's go ahead and save this and come back to our home page. If we reload, we can see these elements show up, and because on my screen they're a little bit small, I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in here so that you can see this. No need for you to do this as well. I just want to make sure that you can see what I'm working with. But you'll notice that this is not a great situation for someone who visits our website. They just say, oh, URL shortener, and there's 2 boxes and shorten. They have no idea how to work with this. So let's use labels to provide some more context about what's going on here. So first, we're going to provide a label that will specify what it is that's going to be inside of the input field below. So we'll go ahead and create an opening and closing tag for our label. And we're going to call this one the website URL. And with this label, we want to make sure that we specify that this is for the URL. So we'll go ahead and type that out. And we'll go ahead and create another label. And this is going to be for the next section where they make that short code. So I'm going to say that this is going to be the short name. I think that's a friendly name for our users visiting the website. And this should be for code. And we'll go ahead and save this. Let's go back to our home page and reload. This looks a little bit better, but I'd love it if there was a new line after the website URL and the short name. So let's go ahead and use a BR tag here for a break. Let's go ahead and save that, reload the home page, And again, I'd like to have the button down below. So we're going to add one more BR tag here. Save this. And now when we reload the page, we can see this is more of what we're looking for. Someone visiting our site has a better idea of what's going on. So let's say that someone comes to our homepage and they provide some data, like maybe they provide some information for the short name, but not a URL, and they hit shorten. Currently, our app takes them to the URL that they're trying to go to, and although it doesn't find that URL, we don't want them to be able to move forward unless they provide a URL and a short name. So let's go ahead and go back to our form and add to each of our inputs here that it is required that there's information for both of those. So I'm going to add required there. If I save this and come back and reload the home page, provide some text, and I hit shorten, you'll notice we don't even move forward at all unless we have the proper information. And what's really cool about this URL field here is if I try and just say, I want someone to be able to go to google.com if they just type go, for instance, it's going to say, hey, no, we need the full-fledged URL. So this is where we're going to have to type out http:// to say to go to Google. Now with a proper URL and a short name, if we hit shorten, you can see this takes us to a URL called your URL. This is the same value that we provided in line 3 that says the action was equal to that. And it also provides the value up top of what URL they want to go to and the code provided. Now, this is something called a GET request, and ultimately what we want is a POST request. We're going to talk about that in the next video. So currently with our app, if we try and shorten some sort of URL, we're left with a not found page, and that's because our form says to go to this URL called your-URL, but we haven't created the route for it. So let's go ahead and move back into our code here. And currently we have this about page, but we don't really need it. So let's go ahead and transform this into our your-URL page. So I'm going to change this from /about to your-URL. Also, I want to change the name of the function from about to your_URL. Now, the reason I've used an underscore rather than a dash is that Python functions don't allow for a dash, so I want to keep that as an underscore. And instead of just returning some sort of string, I'd like to bring back a template. So just like we've done for the home page, I'm going to copy this render template, going to paste it here, and change this to a file that we will create called your_URL. And we'll go ahead and save this. Now the next step for us is to create that template. So I'm going to right click and do a new file here in templates that I'm going to call your_URL.html. And inside of here, I'm going to do similarly like we've done with our home page, a nice h1 tag so that the user knows where it is that they are. And we'll specify here that this is your URL. So we'll go ahead and save this information. And now that we have a proper route here, let's go back to our browser, reload this page, and look at that. We see the updated code. And again, this is because I have my Flask server running in development mode, so it will auto-detect these changes. Now, more than just showing that this is your URL, we want to show what code it is that they specified, the short name that they were looking for here. And so let's go ahead and move back into our code and provide that as a variable that's going to be passed into the template. So to do that with Jinja, we're going to say comma, our variable that we named code here is going to be equal to, and then we need to get access to the information from the request. Now in this case, it was a GET request, but regardless of whether it's a GET or a POST request, up here at the top of the import, we want to import request. So now that we've imported that, we can say that this code here is equal to request.args. And inside of this args is a dictionary for different parameters that could be passed in as GET parameters. So I'm going to go ahead and provide inside of here code, which is the name. If we go back to our URL here, we can see that code is equal to hello in this case, but that's the name of the parameter that we're looking for. So this information will be passed forward to our template. Let's save this file. So here in our your URL.html, we want to specify the code that we pass forward via jinja. We set that was our variable, and here we want to display it. Now, to display that in jinja, we do the 2 curly brackets and provide the name, which in this case is code. And let's go ahead and wrap this inside of an H2 so that we can properly see it. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up, save that file. And now with these changes in place, let's go ahead and reload our page here. And look, we have the hello, which we specified as the code, showing up. Now, because this is a GET request, the GET means that any parameters that we pass forward through the GET request, they show up inside of the URL here. So you can see the website, which is Google, and the code is hello. We can actually manually manipulate this to say Nick, for instance. If I go ahead and hit enter on that, all of a sudden that information is now displayed below. So we properly know how to take information that's provided inside of the GET request. And in this case, on line 11, we provided that as a variable to Jinja so that we could use that to display back to the user and acknowledge, hey, we got the code that you specified. But we really want to change this into a post request. And we'll talk about that in the next video. So currently with our website, if someone provides a URL and a short name for that and they hit shorten, it goes through as a GET request, meaning that all the data from that form is displayed up here inside of the URL. And this is what comes default with a GET request, but we'd rather not have that information displayed. Instead, we'd like to have it come through a post request, which will take all that information and not display it in the URL, but instead we can have access to it inside of that app.py file. So let's go ahead and move back into our home.html. To change our form from sending our information via a GET to instead being a post, we can say that the method is equal to a post. It defaults to GET, but if we explicitly say post, it will change it to post. So we'll go ahead and save this file, come back to our home page. Let's change this here, and because we're in a development environment, it will auto detect our changes. And now that we're at the home page, I'm going to provide a URL and I'll do a name here. And when I hit shorten, you'll notice that none of that information is up top in the URL. However, we get this big nasty error here that says method not allowed. And the reason for this is Flask by default has the security to say, if you create a route, in this case, our route for the home page, our route for your URL, it only allows GET requests. Now, if we want to have something like a post, we can, but we have to explicitly specify that. So here inside of our app.route, we're going to provide one more parameter. And in this case, we're going to specify that we have other methods that we want to use. So we're going to say methods is equal to, and here we provide a list of strings. So in this case, we'll say we want to allow get and, comma, we also want to allow post. So these are the two methods that we're going to allow here. Now, with this, we want to have some sort of detection so that when someone comes to the site and visits this URL, we can decide whether it's a get or a post. So we're going to do an if statement here, and we're going to say if the request dot method is equal to post, then in that situation, we'll want to do a similar thing to where we return the template and show the code that they specified. And then our else situation, this is going to be if the user has come through as a get. So in this situation, for the time being, we'll simply just say that we want to return a string that says this is not valid. And instead of saying .args, we're going to change this to .form. When we're working with a post request to get any parameter information, we have to use a .form instead of a .args. So with this, we'll go ahead and save this file, come back, and because it's a post, we can't just simply reload the page. We have to go back to our home page, fill out this information, and then hit the shorten button. And you'll notice our hello comes through right here. And this means that our post was successful. It's showing the proper code. And if we go and try and just manually re-enter this URL here, it says this is not valid. So it detected when it was a get versus when it was a post. With our new route, we currently are checking to see whether it is a post or a GET request. And when it's a GET request, we're returning back some text to the user saying, this is not valid. Now, this isn't the greatest message for the user. In fact, probably what we want to have happen here is if someone's trying to visit this URL via a GET, we should probably just send them back to the home page so that they can then go create their own URL shortener. So let's go ahead and change this to, rather than just return text, actually render the home page. So we're going to go ahead and say render template. And just like we have up here in the home, we are going to say that we want the home.html file. So let's go ahead and give this a save. And because we've got our terminal running in development mode, if we go ahead and reload this page, you can see if we go to /your URL, it takes us home. Now, this is a little bit confusing for the user because if they go to this URL, they're thinking, well, why is this taking me to the web page? And the fact that it's still up in the URL is a little bit tough for them. So this is a good situation of, rather than just rendering the home template, we actually want to redirect to the home page, which will not only show the home page material, but also change the URL to show that it's at the home page. So in order to do that, we have to import more from Flask. So up at our import line, we're going to add another comma, and we're going to import the redirect. And with this, we're going to now say, rather than rendering a template, we want to redirect. And it's looking for a URL that it can redirect to. So if we go ahead and inside of a string, just put a /, which is the same path that we have up here for our route, it'll redirect to the home page. Now, if we go ahead and reload our page here, you can see that it takes away the /your URL and instead just shows the home page. So this is a lot more helpful to someone visiting our site because they can say, oh, I must have been redirected here to the homepage. It provides a little bit more context as for what's going on. And there's a little bit more that we can do here. If we go back and look at our code, we sort of have manually typed out that we want to redirect to the homepage with just that /, when really it's just that we want this home function. The home page may change directions here. If we were to actually type out something like /home or whatnot, it'd be nice to just always come to whatever this function is. So when we do our redirect, we can use a new function called URL_for, which creates the URL for us based on the function name. You're going to see this used throughout the project, so this will be the first time you see it, but definitely not the last. So let's go ahead and delete this string and instead use something called URL_for. Now again, we're going to have to import this into our project. So up at the top, another comma, and we'll do URL_for. And then we'll now say URL_for. And then inside of the parentheses, this is where we want to provide the name of the function, which in this case on line 6 is home. So we're going to put a string here that simply just says home. We'll go ahead and save this file. And now let's go ahead and reload that /your-URL. If we hit enter, same functionality, takes us to the home page, but now our code is just that much more robust. The purpose of our URL shortener is for someone to enter in a website URL as well as its nickname or short name for that URL so they can quickly access it in the future. We need some way to save this information, and Flask is not a great option when it comes to saving data with a database. You have to do all the work yourself. You often end up writing SQL statements. But for this situation where we just simply have to name what a website URL is and then what the nickname is for it, an instance like a JSON file would be perfect for saving our data. So let's go ahead and write the code necessary in our app.py so that when someone enters in some information, that we can then save that into a JSON file. So this is going to be the situation when someone is doing a post request. So we'll go ahead and just make a new line here. And the first thing that we want to do is create a dictionary that can store the information. If we sort of think abstractly about what we're doing, we want to save the code that the user has passed in, that short name, as the key, and then the value will be the URL that they ultimately want to get to. Now down the road with our URL shortener, we're going to be accepting files, so we have to make sure that we signify whether it's going to be a URL or a file, but just think of it very top level as a dictionary where we have the codes as keys and then those URLs as values. So we'll go ahead and make a variable called URLs that will simply just be an empty dictionary. Now, like I said, we want to specify the key for this URL to be whatever code was passed through. So we're going to say URLs with our square bracket, and we're going to take the same request.form and grab the code for our key, and we'll go ahead and paste that inside. So that's going to specify what our key is, and then as far as the value goes, this is where we have to specify whether it is a URL or a file. So we're going to create a little dictionary here, and we're going to say that there's going to be a key URL because we'll be working with a URL. And then the value here is going to be whatever the user has passed in via that long URL. So if we go to our home.html, we can copy the name of our URL here, and we can come back and redo the same code that we have to get the form data, but instead of code, we're going to be passing in URL. So with this information, we now have a dictionary that has some data inside of it, and the next step for us is to be able to save that to a JSON file. So on our next line, we're going to say with open so that we can open up a file, and we'll just simply name this something like urls.json. We'll also specify here that we're writing to this document, so we'll put in a lowercase w. Then we'll say as url underscore file colon. So this means only move forward if you're able to successfully create or open this url.json file with the name url underscore file. So if that is the case, we want to take whatever's inside of our dictionary and save it there. So we're now going to say json.dump, and inside of our parentheses, we're going to pass in our dictionary URLs, and we're going to say what file we want to save it to, which is our url underscore file. Now, in order for this to work, we have to make sure that we import JSON into our project. So up at the top, this is not going to be importing from Flask, but rather we're going to say import JSON. And if we save this file, now when a user enters in a URL, we should see a new file created. So let's go ahead and test it out. We'll go ahead and reload our page. We'll take a URL like Google, and we'll do a short name like Go. We'll hit shorten. Now let's go ahead and move back to our code editor, and look, we have a new file, this urls.json. And if we click on it, we can see there we have the short term Go as the key, and then we have the URL referenced here, the full Google URL. Now with this, there is currently no code to check and see if we have any duplicates written inside of this file. In fact, if we go back to our home page and we put in some sort of new website, and we use the same short name, and we go back to our code editor, we can see that it's overwritten the data here inside of our JSON dictionary. So we have to have some sort of check to see if a code already exists. In the next video, we'll talk about how we can fix that. To prevent users from overwriting existing data inside of our urls.json, we need to do a check inside of our code to say, hey, if this key already exists and has a URL, don't update it. So let's go ahead and move into our app.py. And here, after we create our URLs dictionary, let's check and see if we already have a urls.json file. So for this, we're going to have to import some code to be able to read this from the file system. So after our import JSON, we're going to do an import os.path. And we'll use that here to say if os.path.exists, and inside of this, we need to check for the file. So we're going to pass in a urls.json, which is the name of our file. Then we'll do a colon to say if that is the case, we want to go ahead and open that file. So similarly, like we see below, we're going to say with, and we want to open. And inside of our parentheses, we want to specify the file name, which is our urls.json. And after that, we're going to add an as urls underscore file. And if that is the case, we want to take whatever we have inside of that file and put it into our URLs dictionary that we created on line 14. So we'll say URLs is equal to JSON dot load, and we want to load in the URLs file. So now that we have this file, it's our job to now check and see if a key already exists before we go ahead and do the work of saving it. So we'll go ahead and do an if statement here that says if request dot form, and we're going to be looking for the code that they passed through. So we're going to say if this code is inside of our URLs dot keys, what this does is it grabs all the keys from the dictionary and it checks to see if it's in that. So if that is the case, we want to say, hey, we should go back to the home page. Now, remember, we don't want to simply just load the home page template. We don't want to redirect just to the slash. We want to use the exact same code that we have here, which is redirect to the URL for home. So I'm just going to copy this, paste this here, and let's go ahead and save and see if this works. Now we first got to check our urls.json. We have an existing key go, so we'll move back to our home page. We will try a new URL for the name of go, hit shorten, and look at that. It keeps us here on the home page, which tells us it detected that. Now just to make sure that this works, let's go ahead and provide a new short name. We'll call this one hello. And look at that, we're able to save additional information because it wasn't already used. We've written the code, so if someone uses a short name that's already been taken, like in this case with go, and they hit the shorten button, it still keeps them on the home page and clears the data. Now, this is the correct move to take, but the user's left really confused. They think, I just put in a URL, I put in a short name, what's wrong? Did it make it? Did something go wrong? They don't really know. So this would be a great opportunity to display some sort of message to the user to say, hey, that's already been taken. You need to pick a new short name for your URL. So this is a great chance to introduce Flash inside of Flask. It's a great way to display messages or information to your users as you move on to new web pages. So let's move back to our app.py. And this is a new Flask skill that we're importing. So let's go to our import line and add Flash right up at the top. And then let's move down to our route where we decide that, hey, this code has already been taken here in line 20. And just before we redirect them back to the home page, we want to display some message to them to say, hey, you've got to pick a new short name. So we're just going to simply type out Flash. And inside of this Flash function, we provide a string that we want to display to the user. So in this case, we could say, that short name has already been taken. Please select another name. So this is just enough information to let the user know what's happened and what they can do to fix the situation. So we'll go ahead and save what we have here, and we'll now go ahead and move over to our home.html. The way that message flashing works inside of Flask is that it will pass forward any flash to the template that you're about to display. Inside of that template, you can check and see if there's any flash messages, and if there are, display them to the user. So just below where we have the h1 tag and above our form, we want to display some code to the user. Now first, we have to check and see if we have any flashed messages. So we're going to go ahead and do a curly bracket and a percentage sign. Inside of Jinja, this is when you run any kind of code. It's not technically Python code, it's Jinja's own way of writing code. But inside of here, we're going to be doing a for loop. And we're going to say for, and we want message in, and we want to do get underscore flashed underscore messages. Now, this is a special name inside of the template that it will check for to see if there are any messages. If they are, they will be stored inside of this variable. Now, the way to end this for loop is we've got to do a curly bracket with the 2 percentage signs in it. And at the bottom of this, we're going to say end for, no spaces in that. But the code in between is going to be looped for every message that we have inside of that variable. So here we can display our message by simply doing our 2 curly brackets and saying message, which is the name that we provided up on line 3. And to see that the user can really notice this, let's go ahead and wrap it inside of an h2 tag. So we'll do an opening h2 and an ending h2. Now, just before we go ahead and move on, because we're using message flashing, we have to add one more attribute into our app. So if we scroll to the top of our app.py, after we create our app variable, we also need to say app.secret_key. This allows us to securely send messages back and forth from the user to make sure that those trying to snoop in on the connection cannot see this information. So we need to provide some sort of random string for the time being. Just because we're in development, you can just type some gibberish. But when it comes to production, you would want to find a very random key and make it long so that no one could guess the secret key. It's something you would not want exposed. So we'll go ahead and save this. And now let's go back to our home page and we'll reload the page here. Let's try and create a short name with Go that has already been taken. And when we hit shorten, we get a runtime error. So let's see if we can find what the issue is. So it's telling us the session was unavailable because no secret key was set. So there must be an issue with how we set the name of our secret key. And if we look at that, I've added an extra C to secret there. So let me go ahead and delete that, save this file, and now reload the page here. And because this is a form, it's going to ask, do you want to load this? And we'll say yes, go ahead and use that data. We'll hit continue. And look, there's our message. It says, hey, that's already been taken. So if we go ahead and pick a new name that hasn't existed, we'll maybe use hello2. It'll properly save that to our JSON file. There's no issues. But if we try and pick something that's already been selected, like that hello2 that we just created, and we hit shorten, it shows us the message and the user says, I have to pick a new name. Our URL shortener right now allows people to provide a short name for a URL that they want to get to quickly. But remember, our URL shortener not only takes URLs, but also can take files for users that they can then upload and have a short name to get to quickly. So in order to accept files, we have to add a new form to our home page to be able to accept that. So let's go ahead and move back to our home.html. And we want to create a form very similar to the one that we have. So let's go ahead and copy that and down below paste. And now there's a few changes we're going to have to make to this second form. So in the top form tag here on our second form, we're going to add an extra field here called enttype and make sure that it's set to multipart/form data. Essentially what this says is that this form is allowed to have file uploads. Next, we're going to change this from website URL to simply file. And we're going to change the name here to lowercase file, say the type on this is going to be file, and then also the name is file. So this will allow the user to upload a file. It will be saved under the name of file when they submit that data. We're going to keep the short name the same, and we're also going to have our submit button be the exact same. So let's go ahead and save this and then reload our home page. Now you can see this other form showing up, which is perfect. Then let's go ahead and move back to our project and talk about how we can actually save the file that the user has uploaded into our system. So the first step for us is when we want to save this is we've got to decide whether the user has sent us a URL or whether they've sent us a file, because in either situation, in either form, it's going to the same your URL function. So what we're going to do is after we've checked to make sure that the key doesn't already exist, because whether it's a file or URL, we still want to make that check. Now we can check and see, okay, is this the file or is it a URL? So for this check, we're going to say if URL, the string, we want to see if this is inside the form keys here. So we're going to say if URL in request.form.keys. And this simply goes through all the keys inside of the form dictionary and says, hey, is there something called a URL? So if there is something, well, then we want to take the following line of code and run that. And that's simply to say, hey, inside of our URLs dictionary, add the following URL for this code key. Now, the else part of this is that there is a file that's trying to be uploaded. So in this case, we first have to one, save the file, and then second, save that into the URLs dictionary. So first, let's go ahead and grab the file from the form and put it inside a temporary variable. So we're going to say f, which is short for file, is equal to request.files. And inside of here, we'll just simply provide the key file. Remember, we did that lowercase file name there. Now, in order to save our file, we have to pick a name in order to save it to. And the issue that we have here is that users might be uploading files with the exact same name, and we've got to make sure that we don't overwrite information similarly to like we found with the URLs. So one way to fix this is to say, we know that the codes are going to be unique. So if we take the code that the user has provided us and the file name that they've given us, we can combine those two things and make sure that these won't collide with each other. So we'll go ahead and create a new variable here called full_name. This is where we're going to save that file name. And we're going to say this is equal to the request.form. And inside of there, we want to go ahead and grab whatever the code is that they've provided. And in addition to this, we want to take our file and get its file name. So we'll say dot file name on that. And one issue that we're going to have here is that this file name may come with some bad intentioned people, right? They may say, I'm going to try and delete something on this server system, or I want to install this script. If we can make sure that none of that happens, we'll be a lot more confident in the uploads that we receive. So we need to bring a new tool into our project. If we scroll up to the top, now stay with me. This is a little bit of a interesting word here. We're going to say from Werkzeug, as best as I can pronounce this, but WERKZEUG. And then we're going to say .utils import. And we want to go ahead and import something called secure_file name. Now this Werkzeug is something that comes from the same people that have created Flask that has a lot of great different tools inside of it. But this one in particular allows us to make sure any file that's uploaded, we can check and make sure that it's safe to save. And we get this Werkzeug package because it is a dependency in Flask, so we don't have to go ahead and manually bring that in, which is nice for us. So now that we have that secure file function, we can come now and wrap up this f.file name with a secure file. We'll go ahead and wrap that just like that. We'll make sure that we've got secure file name so that, and I forgot that up at the top, secure file name. There we go. And now that we have this in place, this will be the full name that we want to save it to, but we have to decide where it is that we're going to save this file. So if we do f.save, we've got to provide a path where we want to save our project. So if we come back over to our terminal, let's go ahead and stop it with a Control-C, do pwd to figure out exactly where you are. And you can see here's my path. Yours is going to be different from mine, but copy whatever path you have, come back, paste it into a string, add an ending slash on the end of that string, and then we're going to add to this whatever full_name is. So it's saying, hey, go save to this specific spot on our computer with this specific name. Now, once we've done that, that will save the file, but then we need to update our urls.json with this new information. Similarly to like we did on line 27 to say, hey, go ahead and save this URL for this chunk of code. So we'll go ahead and copy that line and we'll paste it down below. We're going to keep all of this the same on the left, but here instead of URL, we'll change this to file. And then instead of request.form for URL, we simply just want to take whatever the full name is of that file. So we'll take full_name, and then we can go ahead and save this. So now with this in place, let's go ahead and test out our website. So we'll reload our homepage. Oh, and the reason we're not getting anything is we forgot to restart our server. So let's move back to our terminal, do a Flask run, get that started again. Now reload our homepage, and we need to choose some sort of file. So here inside of the exercise files, I have this picture of a house. The situation I'm thinking is someone's thinking of buying this house at 67 Cherry Lane and they want to show it off to their friends. You can upload any picture that you want, video, JSON file, whatever it is, or you can do the same as me, but go ahead and pick some file, give it a short name. I'm going to choose house in this situation, and I'm going to go ahead and hit shorten. And now once I've done that, you can see it successfully showed us what code we provided. And if we go back to our project, look what has been uploaded. House 67 Cherry Lane.jpg. So it combined those two things, saved it into our directory. And if we look at our urls.json, we now have a new key, house, that is specified as a file with the file name attached to it. Now, when people have come to visit our website, they've made lots of different short codes with URLs and files that they want associated with them. For instance, we have go connected with yahoo.com, hello with google.com, and even if we go to the right here, we can see the house that we just created, which is now associated with a file. So we have to have the ability so that when someone visits our website /house, that we display the following file. Or if they visit our site /go, it will redirect them to yahoo.com. So how do we do this? Well, we need a new route to find these situations when someone has specified these unique URLs. And if we go to our app.py and we look at the existing routes that we have, we could create a new route that would look for instance something like go or house, but how would we know possibly what someone is going to upload to our site? There's millions of different combinations that could come through for the code, and how do we account for these situations? Well, inside of our route, we can use something called a variable route to say, hey, look for a string, and then whatever that string is, it can be passed into the function and then used to determine what to give back to the user. So we'll go ahead and scroll down to the end of our file here and create a new route by saying app.route. And for this route, we're going to do a string and the regular slash to say, this is the start of the URL. And then after this slash, we are going to do angled brackets. And inside of those angled brackets, say string, code. And what this does is it says, look for after the first slash on the website, any sort of string and put it in a variable called code. Then below here, we're going to make a function for this route. I'm going to call this redirect to URL, sort of describes what's going on here. And I'm going to pass in code as a parameter to this function. So the code that you see on line 42 is the same code on 41 that we set up saying, hey, look for a string after the slash and whatever it is, put it inside this variable called code. So now that we have this in place, it's our job to take a look at our urls.json and see if we can find anything matching inside of here. So we've got to first check and see if our urls.json is there. So we're going to say if os.path.exists, and we are looking for our urls.json. Okay, so if this is the case, let's add our colon at the end there. We want to go ahead and open that file. So we're going to say with open. And we're looking to open up again that urls.json as urls_file. So then if we're able to open up this file, we then want to bring back our URLs variable here and set it equal to whatever is inside of that file. So we're going to do a json.load, and we'll load whatever is inside of our URLs file. And now that we have access to this, we can see if we can find the appropriate key that we're looking for. So we'll say if code in urls.keys. So this will tell us if the code that they've entered matches anything that we found here. We can then go ahead and display that URL back to the user. Now with this, remember we have to make a distinction between URLs and files like we have here for the house. So luckily, after we provide the key, we have a separate dictionary that specifies whether it's a URL or a file. So here, we're going to do one more if statement where we say if URL in a string in URLs, and we're going to pass inside that code, and then we're going to check the keys for that little dictionary, just that one entry dictionary. And if URL is in there, we know that we're looking for a URL, so we can actually redirect the user directly to that URL. So we'll do a redirect here. And what we want to pass through here is simply the URLs dictionary, provide code as the key, and then one more time, URL as another key, and that will give us the URL that we're looking to redirect to. Now with this redirect, we have to make sure that we return this back. So we're going to add a return right here before redirect. And let's go ahead and save this file. Now with this, if we go ahead and look at our URLs, we should see, for instance, if we go to hello, we should get back the URL of google.com. So let's go ahead and move back to our site. And let's change our URL to say /hello. And once we've done that, look at that. We get moved onto google.com. So our URL shortener is functional. We can provide a URL, give it a short name, and it will go to that URL for us. It will redirect us there. So really, functionality-wise, the only thing that we're missing is displaying a file that's already been uploaded, and we're going to talk about that in the next video. So currently, we have the functionality so that if someone provides a short name, they can get back a URL if that's what they provided. Now, if they provided a file, well, we don't have that functionality yet. And the reason is we don't know how to serve static files. Well, let's talk about how we can do that in Flask. So there's a couple of steps here. The first one is we have to create a directory in our project called static. So I'm going to right click here and do new folder. I'm going to name this static. This is a special name that Flask is going to look for whenever you have static files. And any static files that you have, they might be things like JavaScript from your website. You might have CSS, maybe a logo for your website. Those are all going to go inside of the static folder. I want to make sure that there's a spot specifically for our users' content, things that they have uploaded to us. So inside of this folder, I'm going to right click and make a new folder. And the name of this folder is going to be user_files. So now I know that anything uploaded to this user files is something that has come from somebody who's visited my website. So now that we have that in place, we need to change it so that whenever we save a file, we save to this directory instead of to the top level where we currently have the house. So let's go ahead and change this line of code on line 31 to say that we want /static/user_files and make sure you have that trailing slash. So we'll go ahead and save that. The next step for us is to say when someone's trying to retrieve that file, if we know that it's a URL, we'll return that URL. But the else part of that situation is to say, you know, they're actually looking for a file. So in this case, we need to get the URL for that static file. And this is how you serve static files in Flask. We say URL_for, and then we first provide a string static that says I'm looking for a static file. And then we have to specify the file name. So I'm going to say file name, and I'm going to set this equal to first the directory that they're under, which is user files. So I'm going to do a string that says user_files with a slash, and then I'm going to add on to this also the file name, which is going to come from the dictionary. So I'm going to copy this and paste it, and instead of providing URL for the key, I'm going to do file for that. And we can tell if we go to our urls.json with a URL, we have the key URL there, but for a file like this house, we have the key file. So with this in place, this is going to tell us that this is how we should return that back. Now, this is just a URL. Remember, we need to redirect and return that redirect back to the user. So we're going to say return a redirect to the following URL. Let's go ahead and wrap that up in parentheses, and we'll now save this. So with this saved, and because we're going to be uploading new information, let's go ahead and delete this house file that we have. And along with that, we're going to delete our urls.json. We're going to start fresh here. Okay, so after making those deletes, let's go back to our home page here and reload. Everything looks great. And now let's re-upload one of those files. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that photo of the house. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and provide the name house for that. I'm going to say shorten. And now let's go ahead and go to /house. And look at that. We get this awesome blown up picture of the house. So I can quickly tell my friends, hey, go check out this cool house. I think it looks awesome. Go to URL shortener /house and you can see it there. That's the whole purpose of this. In addition to that, we have URLs. Like let's make it so when someone types in go, they can go to Google. So let's try /go here. And look at that. We have successful redirect to URLs and files that the user has uploaded. So our URL shortener is able to give back files or URLs for names that people have submitted. But let's say that someone submits a name that we don't have something for. I'm just going to type some gibberish here. If I hit enter on this, well, we get a really nasty looking error, which really isn't something we should be sending back to the user. We want to have a more clean page that says this was not found or something like that. And specifically for this case, we want to use something called a 404 page. You may have seen that on other websites. 404 means we couldn't find what it is that you were looking for. So if we go ahead and move back to our app.py, in order to do this, we need to bring in some new code from Flask. So we're going to add more to our import line here. We're going to add abort. And this abort allows us to, when something goes wrong, send a special error message depending on what it is. Now there's more than 404 errors. You can read all about the different HTTP error codes if you're interested. But specifically the 404 says we couldn't find what we were looking for. So here inside of our route where we redirect to a specific URL, we want to create a line here. And with Python, you got to make sure you get the tabs right. But if for some reason we weren't able to return something back with the if and the with, we go all the way narrowing down to these different items. If for some reason none of that works out, we want to return an abort. So we're going to say return abort, and we have to specify what code that we want to provide with this. And in this case, we want to provide 404. And this tells us, we couldn't find the appropriate file. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and come back and reload this page that has this random string that we've entered in here. And now we get a slightly better page that says not found. The requested URL was not found, but this wasn't a page that we created. This is something that comes by default from Flask. So this is nice, but how do we override this to have our own custom URL 404 not found page? Well, if we come back, we can actually create a custom route for this. So we'll go ahead and start a new line here. And with this, we're going to say @ app. And we want to do, instead of route, we want to say error handler. And then inside of the parentheses, we want to specify that this is the error handler for the 404 code. So we'll go ahead and do that. Then we're going to create a function here. We're going to call this page _not_ found. And what's going to be passed inside of here is an error. And we'll do our colon for that function. And ultimately what we want to do here is we want to return back some template that we're going to create. So we're going to say return render template. And we want to specify inside of here that it will be something like the page not found.html. And in addition to this, we're going to do a comma and also provide 404 to say, hey, this should come back with a 404 error code. Now, this may not make much difference to the user visually, but this will tell the browser that there was a 404 error. Sometimes browsers can use this to help out the users. It's something that we want to push forward. So we'll go ahead and save this. This now means that we need to create a page not found.html. So let's go ahead and open up our templates and create a new file here. And we're going to call this page _not_ found.html. And here we simply want to tell the user that we couldn't find what they were looking for. So we'll do an h1 tag here that says page not found. We'll go ahead and wrap that up. Then just below this, we want to provide a little bit more information to the user about what it is that they might want to do next. So we'll put this inside of a paragraph tag and we'll say, we couldn't find what you are looking for. Come visit our homepage. We'll do a little smiley there to make sure that they're not too freaked out on what just happened. Now with this, in order to get them back to the home page quickly, let's go ahead and provide a link for them so that it's not hard to navigate. So we'll go ahead and make another paragraph tag, and then inside of that paragraph tag, create an A tag. And we'll simply say this is home. And then we'll provide an href here saying where it is that this tag should take them. And this should take them back to the home page for the time being. We'll put a slash here. Let's go ahead and save this. And now go reload this 404 page that we have. And look at that. Page not found. We couldn't find what you're looking for. Come visit our home page. And if they click that link, it takes them back home. Now, the only last thing that I would like to change here is that, again, we've talked about this before, is that what if the routes for our different resources change? It's not great to just put a slash here to say go to the home page. We'd rather say, let's get the URL for the home page and ultimately redirect them there. So we can do this inside of Jinja. Instead of doing the slash, we're going to do our curly brackets. And inside of there, we're going to say URL _4. And then inside of the parentheses, we're going to add the string home, just like this. So we'll go ahead and save this, come back to our website. Let's go to slash some gibberish. Look, it couldn't find it. And if we click on home, still takes us home, but it's a little bit more substantial now. One of the great features of Flask is how easy it makes it to save information into a cookie so that when the user comes back to a website, we can have some data ready for them to see. So if you don't know how sessions or cookies work, essentially it's a way to store some information into a user's browser. It uses it as a key value store to say, hey, I want to store this particular thing so that whenever I come back, I can get that information. If you've ever used a keep me signed in button on a website, that utilizes cookies in order to make that happen. So in our particular Flask app here, if we want to use cookies, we have to import them up at the top. And we do that by adding to our long import line here, session. And session allows us to access those cookies. So we'll go ahead and add that up at the top. Now the question is, how do we want to use cookies inside of our site? Well, I think it would be really neat for the user to know everything that they've uploaded before, and they can quickly see a list of all their different shortcodes. Maybe they forgot to save it somewhere. So if we go ahead and scroll down to when someone creates a URL, we ultimately write that back into a JSON file. We also want to, at this point, save that into a cookie. So to do that, we simply just type session, and then inside of the square brackets here, we provide the key that we want to save into the dictionary. So in this case, let's use the code that they've entered up to this point. So we can copy up from here the request.form code. We'll paste that inside. And here, for our purposes, we really don't need to store a value associated with this code. So I'm going to set this equal to just a Boolean that is true for the time being. But you could think about some creative ways, like maybe you could save a timestamp of when the user saved this so you could easily display that information to the user. But for our situation, we'll just simply set true so that we can get those codes saved into the cookies. Now that we've done that, that's where we want to save the session information. The question is, where are we going to display the session information? And I think it would be appropriate to show this on the home page. So let's go ahead and look at the route that we have for our home page. Remember, we can pass variables into a template. So let's go ahead and, besides saying that we want home.html, let's say that we also want to provide all the different codes that come as part of the cookies. So we're going to go ahead and say here, codes is equal to, and this is where we want to get access to that session. We're going to say session.keys. So when we say .keys, that gets us just all the values that are there on sort of the left side of the dictionary, right? All the values that say true that we're setting it equal to, we don't really care about those. That's why we're saying keys. So with this in place, that information is now being passed forward to our home.html. So now it's just our job to be able to display that information. So let's go ahead and open up our home. And let's go ahead and display this information after the different forms. So we'll go ahead and make some space down here. And first, we want to make sure that we actually have some information to display. So we're going to do our curly brackets with percentage signs because we're writing some code. In this case, we're going to say if codes with an S And we'll go ahead and down at the bottom make an end if for this situation. We'll say end if. And in between these two, this is where we want to say, hey, here are some codes that you've created. So let's go ahead and start with an h2 tag, and we'll make the ending side for that. And we'll declare to the user codes you have created. And then we're going to list these out. Now, in order to do a list in HTML, you can do ordered or unordered list. Let's do an unordered list. We'll make an opening and closing for that. And inside of here, we want to create some list items. So we'll do an opening li and then a closing list item. And for this particular list item, we want to provide whatever it is the particular code is that we're looking at the time being. Now, with this, codes that we pass forward is a list of a bunch of different codes. So we're actually going to have to create a for loop here. So let's go ahead and start a for loop. We're going to do our curly brackets with the percentage signs. We're going to say for code in codes. And let's make sure that we do an ending of that for loop. So we'll say end for down there at the bottom. And then inside of here, we simply want to list out whatever the code is. So we'll go ahead and just say code. We'll now save this. And let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Now, because this is something we just implemented, we don't have any existing cookies. Let's go ahead and delete our urls.json. We'll delete that. I'm also going to go ahead and clear out the user file so that we can start from a clean situation there. And let's go ahead and move over to our browser. So we're going to reload the home page. Let's start first with a URL, and I'm going to do Google for Go. I'm going to hit shorten. And you can see it takes us to your URL. Now, let's go back to the home page. And if we scroll down here, I'm really zoomed in. I'm going to take this out just a little bit. You can see it's now listed codes that I've created. And in this case, Go. Let's say I go ahead and upload the picture of the house. I provide the term house here. And I go back to the home page. Look at that. Now it lists the two codes that I've created before, Go and house. Now this is really great, but it would be awesome if it would just be a link here that the user could click and go see those resources, thinking, oh, what URL did I connect to Go? If they could click on that, that'd be awesome. So let's go ahead and move back to our HTML and wrap this list item inside of an A tag. So we'll do an opening A tag here and then a closing one. And we'll just go ahead and set the href on this to be equal to the code that they have provided. Now, for this, we're going to have to do a little bit of work to say, first we'll do our curly brackets, and then inside of this, we want our URL for. So we're going to say URL for, and inside of here, we're going to provide a string that says redirect underscore to URL, because that's the name of the function that we're looking for. And then we also want to provide code as a parameter to that function. So we'll say code is equal to code. So we'll go ahead and save this, come back to our home page and reload. And now if I click on Go, that takes me to Google, house, takes me to the house. We just created an awesome feature to display all the different codes that someone has created. Now, while we do list them down here, you can imagine someone who created a whole lot of codes could have a really long list of things, and this could be a great place to introduce an API into our project. And one of the awesome things about Flask is it makes it so easy to set up an API. So if we want to turn this feature that we just created into an API, it's as simple as this. Let's move back to our app.py, and we'll scroll down and create a brand new route. So we're going to do our app.route, and the route that we want to create is for an API. So we'll just say /API for the name of this. And as far as the function goes here, let's just go ahead and call this our session underscore API. Now we don't have to go ahead and pass anything in here. So we'll just do our colon. And then with this, we just need to return back those session keys in a list and make sure that it's in the JSON format. So for this, Flask has an awesome tool called JSONify, which basically takes any sort of list or dictionary and turns it into JSON code for you. So we'll go ahead and scroll up to the top of our file here, import yet another item. This is going to be JSON -fi, all lowercase. And then we'll go ahead and scroll back down to our bottom here. And we want to return, remember, our session dot keys, but we want to make sure that this comes through as a list. So we'll go ahead and say list and wrap this all in a parentheses. And then we want to wrap all of that in JSONify's function that takes this list and turns it into JSON. So we're going to say JSONify, and we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So let's go ahead and save what we have here. Move back to our site, and here you can see our two codes. If we visit our site /API, you'll now notice there's our two codes listed in the JSON format. So if you ever need to create an API, you can get more complex than this, but that JSONify can again take dictionaries or lists and turn them into the appropriate values that you want to return. We've dived a little bit into Flask templates and how they can make our life easier, but one thing that we haven't talked about is how templates can extend from one another, meaning that you can have a base HTML file and have components from that shown on every single web page. Now, an awesome example of this is inside of our home.html, we have some code to list out any messages that have been flashed. It would be awesome to have this on every single page in the website. And so extending templates would be a great way to do this. So to show you, I'm going to go ahead and create a new template file here. And I'm going to call this file base.html. Now there's nothing special about this name. It's typically used when you're having something in a website that's going to be used on every page. But this is sort of the building blocks to say anything that's inside of here we want on almost every page. Now you have the power to say whether or not you do want it on a page, but for instance, just to see how this works, let's go ahead and create a new h1 tag and an ending there. And we'll just put inside of here, this is base. We want to clearly see that this is the code that we have associated with this. And then we want to create what's called a block. So if we go ahead and do our curly brackets with percentage signs, we can say block, and then we give some name to this block. So I'm going to call this the main block. Again, there's nothing special about that name. You could totally customize it, make it whatever you want, but whenever you start a block, you have to end that block. So I'm going to say end block at the end of this, no spaces or anything. So with this in place, now I can take this main block and say I'm going to save this, and now come to my home page, for instance, and at the very top of my home page, I want to extend that base template. So what I'm going to do is do a curly bracket with a percentage sign and say extends, and I want that to be the base.html, and I'll make sure I have my ending percentage sign there. And then I have to wrap up all my content inside of one of those blocks that I just created. So if we go back to this base.html, I can copy this exact same chunk of code. I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to take the end block that I have and scroll all the way down to the bottom and put that there. So when I save this and come back to my home page and reload it, you can see this is base shows up at the top, and then all the code from the website. So essentially what we've done is we've taken all the code that we've had inside of our home page, put it in this block called main, say that we want to extend base.html, which means the template will load this base.html, meaning this h1 tag, and then it takes that code we put in the block and has it displayed here. Now, like I said, an ideal use case for this is we can go to this home page, cut out this code that we have to flash messages. So we'll go ahead and cut and now paste this into our site here, and we can get rid of the this is base. You, I think, understand the concept now. Another thing that we can do with our template here is we could display a title for the page. So if we go ahead and look up here, right now, because we don't specify titles, it just has the URL of whatever it is that we're looking at. Like if we go to API, for instance, we just see the same URL, right? And same thing if we go here. So what we can do is we can go back to our template here and say, okay, we want to add a head tag. So we're going to do an opening head, and we'll make sure that inside of here, We are going to create a title. So with this, we have another opportunity to create a block. So I'm going to copy what we have here and we'll paste it where we have home. And instead of being block main, this is going to be block title. So by doing this, now any template that extends base.html, we can specify here that we want to have a block title. And we'll make sure that we'll do an end block on this. Percentage signs, end block. And in this case, if this is the home page, we could just say something like URL shortener. So we'll go ahead and save this, come back and reload our home page. And it looks like we forgot to change this to be title. So let's go ahead and change that to title. We'll save. Now reload this page and look at that. It has URL shortener. But what happens, for instance, if we go to a 404 page? Well, we don't get that pretty thing, but what if we wanted to implement it? Well, we can take a lot of this code where we extend, set a title, and start the main block. I'm going to copy this, go to my page not found. I'm going to paste this up top and make sure that I put an end block at the end of this. Hit save, come back, reload. And now it says URL shortener, but maybe I want to be more specific on this specific page. So I'm going to change this one to say page not found. So I'll save this, come back, reload that page. Okay, so let's do this one more time with your URL. Go ahead and first put in that little end block that we have at the bottom. But then we're going to go ahead and grab these 3 lines of code. And maybe on this one, we'll go ahead and for the title, we'll say something like URL for, and then we'll provide the code inside of there. So we'll go ahead and copy this, paste that in and save. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Let's go back to our home page. Let's make a URL for Yahoo. I'm going to say U for that. So let's go ahead and shorten this. And now you can see it says URL for you. So this will become really important as you have more and more complex websites, particularly if you were going to have like a navigation bar that you wanted to show up on every page of your website. That's a great time to use templates and extend them. And we're going to talk about that in the next video. Now, if you go ahead and look at our URL shortener, functionally, it has everything that we talked about in the explainer video, but it looks nothing like it, right? This is really kind of a sad state for our website, and I've gone ahead and created some new code for us that is going to really just brighten up what we have. Now you'll notice it doesn't change any of the functionality as far as our app.py goes. This file is untouched. It's going to be exactly the same. Really, I've just added some static files that has some JavaScript and CSS, and then also the templates are jazzed up a little bit so you can really see this application shine. So in order to do this, go ahead and go to your exercise files. And first, grab some items for the static. This is, again, going to be the CSS and JavaScript. And almost every website at some point is going to list out different items like this. So we're going to go ahead and drag these into our static folder. Make sure they don't go into the user files, but into static. And then go ahead and grab the templates. Now, these are going to replace the templates that we currently have. So let's go ahead and select our templates now. We're going to right-click and delete those. And then we'll go ahead and move back to our file here, drag these new templates into our project. And with this, let's go ahead and because we have our server running in development mode, if we reload the home page, ooh, look at that. Now, if you'd like to, you can go ahead and take a look at the code here. You can see in my base.html, there's some very similar things like the title. We had created this before. That is the exact same. I've added some code to have like a navigation bar that shows up at the top. Again, flashing the messages. This is something that we had before, but in this case, I've gone ahead and made it so that they have a red background and white text. And then there's that main block. And here we list some JavaScript. So this isn't too far from what we had inside of the home page. Again, a lot of just styling things to make this look that much better. Again, you can tell we've got the 2 different forms here. We've got the code down below. I got API that I can quickly click to and see that information. But let's go ahead and test this out. Like, let's do a short name. Maybe let's do Nick for the website of Google. And if we hit shorten on this, takes us to your URL. URL for Nick. And look, if I just click this button, it copies it for me. I can paste that in and quickly go see where it takes me. Other situations that we have here, let's go ahead and test out a file here. So we'll go ahead and grab, again, something like Cherry Lane, and let's do house. We'll call this house 2. Look at that. We get that showing up. Now, I do want you to see, for instance, if I go ahead and choose something that we already have, like a house, and we'll pick any file here, but because that name's taken, look, the message flash, it says, hey, short name has already been taken. Please select another name. So this is cool that, we have the message flashing, but now that it's stylized a little bit more to the user, this will be a lot more prominent and they'll say, oh, I've got to take an action on this. I've got to do something. So it's very important with projects that you make that they have a style to them, that they look presentable. It really is that last bit of polish that you need to make people really wowed with your website. So now that we have this in place, we can go ahead and move forward to talking about how do we deploy this to the internet so that everyone can enjoy the work that we've just created, and how do we test this to make sure that our code is ready to go. Up to this point, when we've been creating this Flask application, everything has been directly tied into that app. All of our routes, our secret key. But as our app would continue to grow, if we were going to continue development, it could get really messy to have everything right here inside of this one file. And you can imagine if we added a blog and maybe a scheduling thing onto our app as we just built and built, it would get really complicated. In Flask, you can break things into sections called blueprints, and those blueprints allow you to have some sort of organization to your code so that everything's not in one place. So I want to show you how to do this so that in the future you could do this in your own projects, and you'll see how it's useful for both testing and deployment, which we're going to be covering here. So although we really only have one blueprint for this app, you'll see how it could be helpful. So the idea is that a Flask application could have multiple blueprints inside of it. So in order to make this transition, it's going to be quite a bit of work here. If you'd like to just take the code that we finish up with, you can just grab the exercise files and just sort of watch me for a bit and then pick up in the next one, or you can go ahead and make these changes with me. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is create a new directory in our project, and we're going to call this URL short. This is going to be the name of our new blueprint. So I'm going to call it URL short. And I'm going to move my static folder in there, my templates, my app.py, and I'm going to keep the urls.json on the outside, although you could very easily change those as well. It's really a matter of, do you think other blueprints should be able to access this quicker from the outside? It's up to you there. But with those inside of the URL short, the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and create a new file inside of our URL short. So this new file is going to be called __init__.py. And this is going to be called automatically by Flask in order to set up our application. So because we're creating an application, we're going to copy the same code from Flask, import Flask, bring that into this file. And we're also going to take a lot of this code for creating the app. So we're going to go ahead and cut and paste this here inside of this file. So we're going to do the same Flask name, have the app secret, all that great stuff. But then what we want to do is inside of our app.py, add something called blueprint in here. So go ahead and make sure that we're at the end of the line here. We're going to also import blueprint. And once we've done that, if you'd like to, we no longer need the capital Flask as an import, so we can go ahead and get rid of that. But here we need to say BP, short for blueprint, is equal to capital blueprint. And inside of blueprint, we want to have the new name of this, URL short, comma, and then __name __. Okay? So we'll go ahead and save that, move back to our init.py and talk about what we need here. So we've already gone ahead and created that application. We've set the secret key. That's all fine there. Next, we need to import our blueprint. So we're going to say from dot import, and we want to import the URL short. And we want to say app.register blueprint, and we'll go ahead and provide the name of that, which is URL short.bp. So this will go ahead and register that into the application, and we need to go ahead and return this. And you're saying return, why are we returning this? Well, ultimately all of this is going to end up in a function. So we'll go ahead and tab that over, and we're going to make a new function here called create underscore app. And inside of here, we're going to be passing in whether this can use a test configuration. So we're going to say test config is equal to none. While we won't be using this now, this could be something helpful for you in the future, so I like to add it. So we'll go ahead and save that there. Great. Now that we have this in place, we can go ahead and move back to our app.py, which we are going to be renaming to URL short.py. Now, the reason for the renaming here is, while technically it could keep the name app, I like it to say the app is something that we're creating in this init file. It's not something here. And so by changing that name, I think it helps more to understand what's going on here. So once we've made that change, there's a few other changes that we'll have to make. So this BP is now going to replace every instance of app here. So rather than the app.route, it's BP. So let's go ahead and just paste this into these different items here. Great. And now that we have this in place, we also have to fix our URLs. So anywhere that we have a URL for, and it's using something like home, it's no longer just home, it's going to be URL short.home. And we're going to be copying and pasting this a lot. So I'm going to copy this here, and let's go ahead and search for this again inside of this file. And here we have it at the home. And I believe that's the last that we need for our new URL short.py. Great. So with this in place, there's one other thing that we're going to have to look at, and that's some of the paths that we've created. So for instance, here we've said URL-shortener/static. Well, now we need to go ahead and add that we need to look inside of URL short/static/user file. So that's one situation. And I believe we're safe down here. Yes, static still knows where to look for. So we'll go ahead and save that. Now, let's go ahead and try loading our project to see what it looks like. Now, because we've done so much monkeying around with this project, let's go ahead and just close out of our terminal and start a new one. And with this new terminal, we need to move into our project. Make sure you're at the top level directory. Don't move into URL short, but let's get into our pipenv shell. Okay, and once we're there, we want to now say export capital Flask underscore app equal to URL short. So I know it's a little bit sad that now this is something we have to type every time we're testing this out, but this is what happens when you move a project to the blueprint level. And we're going to set env equal to development. So we get that automatic loading. So now let's go ahead and do a Flask run with this. And if we try and go ahead and run the home page, you're going to see we get a lot of errors, but error pages are going to help us figure out the different things that we need to fix. So the first one here is talking about the session API, and it's saying it can't build a URL for it. Well, where do we try and build a URL for that? It's inside of our base template. So if we go ahead and move over to our base template, you can see that here we do a URL for the session API. So let's paste in that URL short dot there. Let's do it for the home page, and we'll go ahead and save this. Now we'll reload this page, and we see the home page. So let's go ahead and test out some other pieces. API seems fine. Let's go ahead and provide some sort of name. I'm going to just do a random string here for Google. And here we can see we've got a problem with URL direct. So this is inside of our your URL. So let's go ahead and replace here, add a URL.short, and that looks like the only place we need that. So let's now move back to the home page, and let's provide some random text there. And now we can create a URL. Let's go ahead and make sure that when we go back to the home page, nope, now we've got an issue with the session. So if we go ahead and move back to our home.html, down at the bottom, we've got to make sure that we add this URL short dot there. So we'll go ahead and save this. Now reload the home page. Great. Everything's looking good. I think the last place that we need to test is what happens if we enter in a random string here. The page not found, it also needs some updating. So we'll go ahead and change page not found, save that, and now we can reload that page and we can see that that's all working. So as you can see, it's a lot of work to convert from just an application where everything's directly tied into there to where you instead have a blueprint and everything's connected to that blueprint. I want you to see inside of our URL short.py that it's all connected here. And then in this init, you can see where everything comes together. Now, because this file is going to compile all the different blueprints, we want to make sure that we take it outside of this directory. So we're going to take this init file, move it up to our top project level here. You can see it's not connected with the URL short anymore. It's outside of that. And because we've made this change, you're going to have to go over to your terminal, close it, and go through the whole process of setting up the shell again and running Flask. But I want you to see the vision of we have this one init file, and then we could have multiple directories here with lots of different blueprints that all come together as one right here. Now that we have a project that we want to deploy so that everyone can enjoy, it's a good idea to get some testing in place. Testing allows us to make sure that whenever we make changes to our project, that we can be confident that the code that we've written is unaffected and will still work for our users. So in order to do some testing, let's go ahead and move over to our terminal, hit Control-C to stop our server, and we're going to install a tool to help us test our project. And we're going to do a pip env install, and we want to install PyTest. Now there's lots of great documentation with PyTest about how to make all sorts of different tests for your data. I'm going to show you a couple of simple steps here. So let's go ahead and move back into our project. And the first thing that we need to do is create a file. Now the name of this file is important. So let's go ahead and in the top level directory, create a new file. And this needs to be conf test.py. This is a specific name that PyTest is going to be looking for whenever it's going to be running tests. Now inside of here, this is essentially our chance to get set up before we run any tests to say this is the application that we're looking to test. These are any steps that we might need. So we're going to go ahead and first import PyTest that we just installed. Next, we are going to import our project. So we'll say from URL short import, and then we want to bring in our create_app function. Now that we have access to that function, we need to create two fixtures. Fixtures help establish the testing situation. So we're going to do @pytest.fixture, and then on our next line, create a function, def app, and we don't need to pass anything inside. So we'll do a colon to finish up our function here, and we're simply going to say app is equal to create_app with our open and close parentheses, and then we will yield app. Now, once we've done that, we have one more fixture to set up, and that is to get a client so that the testing framework can act as if it was a browser and testing out the project for us. So we're going to do another @pytest.fixture, and the function that we're going to create here is called client. Now inside of this client function, we need to have app as a parameter, and then we simply just need to return app.test_client. Great, so now that we have this in place, let's go ahead and save that file, move back to our terminal, and if we simply just type out PyTest and hit enter, we should see that we get some output here from PyTest, but you'll notice the text at the bottom is very important. It says no tests ran. So all the code that we've written was just to set up a groundwork for us to be able to test. It's now time to go ahead and create our very first test. So let's go ahead and move back into our project. Again, at the top level directory, let's create a new file. Now the name of this file can be whatever you want. It needs to start with a test underscore, but after that, you can call it whatever you want, and you can have multiple test files to organize your situation, but I'm going to do something like test main. I've only got a few things that I probably want to test, so I'll just create this test_main.py. And inside of this file, we need to import our create app. So we're going to say from URL short import create app. Excellent. And once we have that in place, we just create functions that will test out different functionality. So in this case, let's go ahead and make a function called test_short in, and we'll go ahead and pass in our client here so that it can act as if it was a user using a web browser. And essentially what we want to do is test and see if we can find the word shorten on the home page. If we can find that, that means that we've probably set up our forms correctly. So in order to execute this code, we need to go visit the home page. So to do that, we'll say response is equal to our client.get, and the get, you just simply have to insert a string of what URL you want to visit. So if we just do the slash, this is going to mean go to the home page. Now that we've done that, the testing officially starts here where we say assert, and we assert that some situation is true. So in this case, we're going to say assert B, and then we're going to do inside of a string here, capital shorten, that's the text that we're looking for. We're going to assert that this is in the response.data. So let's go ahead and save this, come back to our testing screen here. Let's go ahead and run PyTest one more time. And look at that. We have one test and we passed it. Now, the situation here is, for example, if I was looking for something like shorten Z, which is not inside of our project, and I were to rerun this test one more time, you can see that this test fails. And it gives you very specific data about where this failed and how it couldn't find the following thing here. And so this can be really helpful as you add more and more tests to your project, that you can run this PyTest right before you deploy your project and make sure any code that you've added doesn't affect things that you've created previously. Now, before we go ahead and walk through the steps of deploying our project, I want to talk about something that gets thrown around all the time, but you might not have a great understanding of, and that is WSGI, which is short for Web Server Gateway Interface. WSGI is essentially a protocol for Python applications in order to serve websites in a uniform manner. Now, that was a whole lot of words. Let's talk about what that means practically. So within WSGI, you have essentially frameworks and servers. Some examples of Python frameworks are going to be Flask or Django, and some examples of servers are going to be things like Gunicorn and WSGI. And essentially what WSGI allows is to say, if we have some sort of Python framework that wants to ultimately serve web pages, if it follows the WSGI format, that means that any Python framework you choose can work with any compatible WSGI server, like Gunicorn, WSGI, and there's a whole list of both sides here, framework and servers. I'm just sharing some of the most common. But essentially, WSGI is a protocol. It's not something special that you have to install. Flask and Django by default implement those, same as Gunicorn and WSGI. So as we move forward and deploy our project, although we've written it in Flask, we're going to integrate it with Gunicorn so that Gunicorn can ultimately be the one that's serving up our files. When you're ready to share your project with the world, it's time to deploy it. Deploying a project simply means that you want to upload your code to a server somewhere that will always be on and available and be able to share your website with everybody. So if you try and run your server just on your computer and share it with everybody, maybe your computer shuts down, maybe you have a laptop that's not always on all the time. It's really important to have a server somewhere that's running your code. So I'm going to show you how to deploy your project on a Linux server, which is very common for deploying a Flask project. I'm using Ubuntu 18.04 if you'd like to follow along. There's lots of great services out there that can offer you a Linux server of your own so that you can upload your code and share it with the world. So assuming that you have a Linux computer ready to share your project, the first thing is that you need to upload your code. And you can see that I've got our project here, the URL shortener. I used Git in order to upload my code to a Git repository, and then I cloned it into my server here. You could also just with an FTP server also send over files if you'd like to do that. Now, once we have our project, we want to go ahead and move into that directory. And let's go ahead and make sure that everything's working here. So we're going to go ahead and do a pipenv install. And it's important to make sure that you have pipenv installed on your server here. And it looks like we've got everything that we need. So let's go ahead and do a pipenv shell. Now that we've done this, let's go ahead and make sure that our app can run. So we're going to do an export just like we've done before and say capital Flask app is equal to URL short. And we'll go ahead and do a Flask run to make sure that that's still working. So everything looks good here. Let's go ahead and do a Control C. Now to test and see if we're able to see our code running, we're going to do a Flask run, but we're going to add an extra parameter here. We're going to say that we want to run this, and we want to run this --host, and then specify that this should be equal to 0.0.0.0. So this essentially says, go and share this with the world. I want this to be available publicly. Now, assuming you don't have any firewalls on the server and it's ready to serve this, you can see that it's running our website down there at the bottom at port 5000. And if we look at the very top of the terminal, my particular instance here that I'm running on my server has an IP address of 159.89.236.208. Now yours will definitely be different than mine, but we just need to visit that IP address with the 5000 port. So once I've gone ahead and entered in my IP address and the 5000 port into my web browser, I can go ahead and hit enter, and we should see our website showing up. Now, of course, we don't see any of the session cookies that we had before because we've uploaded this to a brand new server. There's no sessions or cookies created with anybody. But this is not an ideal situation for running our project. We want to make sure that it's running behind an actual server that can make sure that this is up and running efficiently for everyone to utilize. So let's go ahead and move back to our terminal. And rather than just running this with the built-in server that comes with Flask, let's use a server called Gunicorn. That stands for Green Unicorn, in case you were interested. So let's go ahead and install this with pipenv. We'll say install Gunicorn. And once we've installed Gunicorn, we can go ahead and try running our server with Gunicorn rather than the built-in server with Flask. So to do that, we're going to run Gunicorn, and we need to specify specifically what it is that we want to run. And in our case, that's going to be URL short. Make sure this is in quotes, colon, and we're going to call our create_app function. Then we'll end our quote there. And then we're also going to specify that we want this to run with the 0.0. So it's -b, then 0.0.0.0. Okay, so we'll go ahead and hit enter on this. This is now running with Gunicorn. It looks fine. You can notice that it's running on port 8000 now instead of 5000. So let's go ahead and move over to our browser. And if we try and visit on 5000, it will no longer work. But if we change this to be port 8000, we can see we get the website back. So that's awesome. Now we're almost there, but just not quite yet. We want to have something in front of our Gunicorn server to make things even more efficient. And a really recommended configuration is to have Nginx in front of Gunicorn to run our site. So let's go ahead and move back to our terminal, hit Control C to stop that server. We're going to do a sudo apt install Nginx. And once you have that installed, you want to make sure that it is running. You can do that with a systemctl status Nginx. You should see that phrase active and showing that it's running. Now, if you have this, go ahead and do a colon and hit Q to quit out of that. And then we need to go ahead and see what our site looks like now. So if we go ahead and move back to our website and get rid of all the ports entirely, so it's just the IP address, you can see we have a warning here from Nginx saying that things aren't set up correctly. Yours might look a little bit different than mine, but this is telling us that we have a few things that aren't set up quite right just yet. So let's go ahead and look at Nginx configuration file. We can do that with a sudo nano/etc Nginx sites enabled, and then we want to go to default. Now inside of this configuration, this can get tricky quick, but just keep the listen 80 up at the top. That's saying it's listening on port 80 for any traffic. And then down here where we have the location, we simply want to include the following code, which basically says, look to the local host or that 127 number on port 8000 for any information when someone visits the site. Now, a great resource to find this information, in case you're interested, you can find on the Gunicorn website. So if you go ahead and look at gunicorn.org and you go to the deployment, you can find the exact text that you can copy and then paste into your configuration file. So let's move back into our terminal here. Once you've set that information, I'm going to do a Control X. I've set this already for us. The next big thing that we need to do is make sure that Gunicorn is constantly running all the time. Now we could use the previous command that we did where we specify that we want this to run on the zeros, but as soon as we close this terminal window, that will stop running. So in order to fix that, we can go ahead and do a -- daemon to make sure that this runs constantly even while the terminal is closed. So we'll go ahead and hit enter on that. And now if we come back and we check our website, we should see that it's fully functional. Now, one last tidbit that you'll need in order to be able to upload files to the correct location is you'll need to edit where you're going to be storing that. So if you go ahead and do a nano, which is simply a way to edit text, and then URL short /URL short.py, go ahead and move down to the line of code where we have specified where we want to save that and make sure it's in the proper directory that you have on your server. Thank you so much for coming along and checking out Flask. I really hope you enjoyed and appreciated how quickly we were able to get our application up and running with Flask. If you'd like to dive more into Flask and see all the different things that it has to offer, I really recommend Flask documentation website. Now, I often don't say that about projects, but Flask has some amazing documentation. Not only are they great for getting you the basics, which is a lot of what we covered here, but they really go deep into a lot of other topics and have great up-to-date information for you if you're interested in that. Now, if you liked learning about this Python framework that allowed you to build a website, you might also be interested in Django. Django, as we talked about, is another WSGI compatible framework that allows you to make websites with Python. You'll find that Django is much more structured than Flask, and that might be a positive or a negative for you. You'll really just have to check it out to see which one you like more. If you're